Charlotte Johnson from the Centre for Sustainable Energy. And it's going to be talking to us about EDI as a research objective and then insights from the Centre for Sustainable Energy Smart and Fair programme. So welcome, Charlotte. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me. It's great to be here. I need to start off with a big disclosure that I am not a modeller, I'm not a mathematician, and I don't model human behaviour, but I do work with a team of people who do that. So I'm just here to talk about how we have set up a programme of research that really tries to answer how we can make the low carbon transition in the UK more equal, diverse and inclusive. And so that's the focus of the talk, is hopefully to give some thought-provoking insights on the kind of way we approach that topic, rather than the specifics of how we do the behaviour modelling. Right. I'm just running two machines here. So. Okay. So just to introduce my organisation, I work for a charity called the Centre for Sustainable Energy. So we are a UK-based charity, a national charity, who've been working on fuel poverty and supporting action on climate change since the 1970s. Our organisation is fairly small. We've got 145 staff, but what we have is 3 different delivery teams, and this does become important later, I promise. So we've got one team that's our largest team, who are in charge of running household energy services. So what that means is that they work with households who are potentially in fuel poverty or in crisis with their energy bills, and we support them. They provide over the phone advice, or they go to people's homes and they help them understand how their home is using energy, what they can do about it, how they can manage their finances and their bills, and we also provide retrofit assessments. So if someone wants to change the way that they use energy in their home, we can provide a number of different support services that help them understand and then change their energy use in the home. And then we've also got a team of people who work on local and community empowerment, so they're supporting organisations on the ground to take action on climate change. And then we've got my team, and we're the research and analysis team, and we've got a group of people who do software engineering and modelling and data analysis and social research. And we work with those 2 on-the-ground teams as well to provide research and decision support services to households, to advisors, to local organisations and to government. And so there are just some few examples of the way that we go out and help people. You know, we run kind of workshops, we take people around houses to help them understand what energy means and how you use it. But and we also have a major focus on fairness. So cutting across all our work is the overarching question is, how do we achieve a fairer energy system that works effectively for all types of people? And we've had a track record of sort of pushing thought leadership in this space. So our organisation developed a method for predicting fuel poverty locally in 2003, and then in 2011 we worked with the Joseph Rowntree Foundation to do some analysis on the distribution of carbon emissions across the UK population, so looking at how emissions correlate to income, for example. And then in 2014 we worked with Ofgem, who are the energy regulator, to provide a set of domestic consumer archetypes to help them understand how policy affects different types of people differently. So the same policy has different impacts for different types of households, and it's quite important for the regulator, who's in charge of ensuring that the energy markets work well for all types of households, to really understand that actually one policy has different outcomes in terms of how well a household is able to afford energy and keep their home habitable. But the focus of today's talk is on the low carbon transition, and how we can ensure that as we transition, as the UK sort of moves away from a centralised energy system to a much more decentralised, digitalised and decarbonised system, that all households are included and able to participate and engage. And we're particularly interested in what we call this move behind the meter. So for people who aren't energy people, essentially the energy industry has historically in the UK been interested in managing supply and demand, but in sort of passing energy to the meter point, which is the point that they kind of say, okay, well, whatever the person does with the energy on the other side of their meter point. So as soon as it goes into the home or the business or anything, that's not really our interest. They just buy the energy, and that is up to them to decide what to do with it. But what we see with the low carbon transition is that actually it becomes much more important to understand what people are doing with that energy, because it becomes much more important to understand when and how they use energy in order to be able to manage renewable energy sources, to keep the system in balance, and to make sure that we're using our energy infrastructure and managing constraints. So essentially what that means is that products and services are moving behind the meter, and it's changing the way that people interact with the energy system. And the energy system is on its part trying to change how people behave and interact with the energy system through, for example, products and services like time of use tariffs, which say, please change when you use your energy, or encouraging people to install low carbon technologies, such as changing from a gas boiler to a heat pump. And what this transition, what we're interested in this transition, is the fact that this includes an implicit assumption about how people behave, and it makes an assumption about what is the right way to behave and what is the wrong way to behave. So if you can behave in the right way, if you can get the right bits of kit, if you can sign up to the right tariff, if you can adjust when and how you're using energy, then you can get rewards. But our concern is that if you struggle to make any of those choices or any of those steps, then you become penalised, and your energy costs more, and you're at risk of being pushed into fuel poverty. So the work that I'm talking about today is really trying to understand how our energy transition is reinforcing inequalities or creating new ones. So CSE runs a programme of work called Smart and Fair. It was set up in 2019 with distribution network operators, because at that time Ofgem had created a requirement for distribution network operators to what they called leave no one behind. And we wanted to understand, what does that mean in practice? How do we know that everyone is able to access the energy they need and that no one is being left behind by the low carbon transition? And what we did was we first set up a kind of conceptual framework to help us understand what are some of the risk factors that might mean that someone's less able to participate or engage with the energy system. And then we have those 5 what we call smart energy capabilities. So the things that people have in their homes, the energy technologies they have and how they use them, their financial resilience, their personal and social values. So how able are they to take on new ideas or to try out new innovative solutions, their digital confidence, and then the type of home and where they live. That all affects somebody's ability to engage and benefit from the low carbon transition. And just to demonstrate that really clearly, I've got these 2 quotes that came from a piece of research we did on what's called the Demand Flexibility Service. So this was a national trial of domestic demand shifting. And what you can see there are 2 quotes from people who had signed up, they'd opted in, and they were trying to shift their behaviour. And both these participants had different mobility issues. And you can see that the first person who says, in their feedback about how easy they found it to participate in this demand shifting trial, they said, I'm disabled and I found turning off the lights was potentially dangerous. So that person is responding to the price signals they're getting by putting themselves in jeopardy. But they're also revealing a sort of low level of energy literacy, because turning off their lights is not the best way to respond and to receive value for this particular product that they've signed up to and this service that they're piloting. But then you contrast that with the other person who has similar mobility issues, and they're explaining, I just go onto my phone, I switch something off, especially if it's downstairs thing, and I'm not sure whether it's been left off. So it's someone who's got a similar type of vulnerability in terms of their mobility issues, but they have very different smart energy capabilities. They're in very different positions to be able to participate effectively and make the energy system work for them. So what we do in the organisation is, and in this work programme particularly, is that we have these three pillars, and I'm just going to focus on the first 2. The first one is to really understand participation, because this is an emerging field and there's new innovation, there are new products and services that people are signing up to. We still have limited evidence on how well these products and services work for different types of people. So, what is that intersection when you get a new type of energy service? How does that intersect with how people understand it and work? How does it intersect with existing vulnerabilities and inequalities? And so there's a whole piece of work just to get the evidence base of how different people understand and respond to these kind of services. And then the next chunk of work is around supporting people. So that's actually going and providing smart energy advice to help people understand their options and take appropriate choices. And then the third area is working with industry and government to make sure that they're really building these insights into the way that they're thinking about their markets and their customers and their regulations. So are they really understanding different abilities to participate when they're designing products and services, but also when they're designing markets and regulations? So that's what we do. I'm just going to take you through a couple of examples of work. The first one is CrowdFlex. This was a domestic demand shifting trial that was run over 2 years. It was a randomized controlled trial with 2 types of services that people could sign up to. The first one, utilization, was this active response. There were 100,000 OVO customers who had signed up to receive notifications to change when they consumed electricity. And then there was also an availability service. So you had 33,000 customers who signed up to have their EV automatically charged or discharged in response to lower electricity prices or network constraints. And this evidence base was really used to create models that were used by the system operator to be able to understand how they can use this form of demand flexibility in their control room. So how reliable is it? How reliable is human behaviour to be able to be called on by the system operator? Is it as robust as, for example, turning up and down a power plant? And in terms of sort of consumer experiences, the headline findings were around price sensitivity, and so they did find that customers were price sensitive, but interestingly, lower incentives were more cost effective per kilowatt hour of flex. And I think that's a really interesting finding, because what they're saying is that, yeah, you can pay more money and people will respond in a particular way, but people do enough for lower financial rewards. And what that then opens up the question as why? What is it that makes someone respond if it's not just money, but people are willing to continually participate and continue to respond to these signals, and that you get enough of a response even if you're not paying a huge amount of money? And it was, sort of 20p per kilowatt hour is the kind of, I think, level of reward that people were seeing. So what we did was we ran consumer research with households to really focus on whether consumer characteristics correlate to different types of shifting strategies, to different types of experiences, and to different outcomes. So do different types of households have a different experience, and does that end up with a different sort of level of reward? And we were focusing on 4 types of groups. Households that may be vulnerable, we have known factors of vulnerability that affect their ability that put them at risk in the energy market of unequal or unfair outcomes. Households that face barriers, households that may have enablers for demand shifting, and then how different high and low electricity users may experience things differently. And these groups were all coming from existing research that we'd done. That piece of research I showed at the beginning with the 2 quotes of consumers, for example, because there's still an open question on whether this kind of demand shifting puts anyone at such risk that the regulator should say this group of households should not take part in these kind of services. These kinds of households stand to be significantly negatively impacted, either their health or their finances. But that's still an open question, and we wanted to know, are there any concerns, or what can we do to help people make the most of these kind of demand shifting services? We engaged with over 22,000 people. We linked their feedback to information about their home, their circumstances, and their energy data, and we tracked the same households across 18 months to understand habit formation. And our headline findings were quite, just helped us answer the top line, what do people do and why do they do it? Well, most people do respond. Most people shift manually, so they're not setting up some complicated system. They're literally stopping what they're doing at the point that the demand shifting prompt comes in, and they change what they're doing. But if those households who could automate, so the 20% who were able to automate their demand response, saw a far more significant saving. They were able to save, on average, 30% more electricity. And that we saw across the board, motivations are mainly about saving money, but there's also motivations around contributing to a greener grid and being interested in just trying to make demand flexibility work. And then we also saw this kind of change over time that we were looking for, which is that people start to become accustomed and they can build their understanding of what's required. They can build their understanding of how to effectively participate. But then what we did also was to drill down into specific types of consumers to understand specific experiences. So we ran focus groups with people who had physical or mental health conditions or disabilities. So 27% of that 22,000 set of consumers who responded to our surveys did have a physical or mental health condition or disability. And of those, 69% felt positive. So, we're really looking on this question of consumer protection. Is there anything about a condition that might mean you should not be invited or protected from taking part in these services? But we didn't find that. There was high levels of positive experience. The level of reward was on a par with average manual shifters, and they took part just as frequently as those without a health condition or disability. However, what we did flag was that some people were changing their medical or care routines in order to shift their demand, and so we just wanted to shine a light on that and suggest that the suppliers who are in charge of protecting their consumers understand whether or not their consumers are taking risks that they wouldn't want to see. And we also did a similar piece across a number of different groups. And for example, we focused on financially insecure families. And again, so we saw that these households actually respond more. So they're likely to respond much more than other types of households more regularly. They earn slightly more, but they also had higher than average levels of positive feelings about taking part. And they were more likely to use timers, apps, and smart technologies. So the main point of running this research is to build this evidence base and also to point out to the regulator and to suppliers what their products and services are doing when they interact with existing conditions and perceptions and consumer experiences. But what we also do is that we as an organisation also use these kind of insights about how people are responding and why they're responding. And I'll just quickly run through sort of how we do that in terms of the advice sector. So as I said, we pioneered this form of advice that supports people to understand their options. This is particularly needed as these products and services move behind the meter. It's important that people understand their options and what they can do. So what we do is we take a smart energy capabilities view of the person, but also of the product, and we look at the products on the market. So we are constantly checking for new forms of tariffs, new types of low carbon technologies, new forms of flexibility services, and then we're profiling them according to what they ask of the household. What is the implicit assumption about the human, the household, and their behaviour that is encapsulated in this product that you have to have in order to make this product work for you? And we profile those offers according to those 5 smart energy capabilities that I explained at the beginning. So, your energy use, your dwelling, your digital confidence, your financial status, your personal aptitude. And then we create a whole set of different types of offers according to those capabilities. And that means that when an advisor goes out and talks to somebody, they also talk through those 5 capabilities with a person, and they understand their energy use, they understand their digital confidence, they understand their propensity and ability to take up different types of products and services, and how able they are to bear financial risk. And then in this case, so our advisor Pallavi went through and explained that she talked to an owner-occupier, she found out the information about their priorities and their abilities. This person did have a night storage heater, but the night storage heater time of use tariff wasn't appropriate because it was the wrong type of heater, but also the person had low digital capability. So what the recommendation there was that a static time of use tariff would work for that person's capabilities. But what I also want to draw attention to is just all the other types of support that was offered to this person. And this is all about helping that person get to be that kind of idealized consumer that is able to behave in what is considered the right way for these products and services to work perfectly and to ensure that the benefits are seen by the household in terms of being able to manage their energy and make sure it's the least cost for them. And then finally, the other direction that we take these kind of insights is to then start doing modelling of consumer demographics in order to understand the kind of whole system impacts of consumer choices and behaviours. So, for example, we would use a building heat model to understand, in this case, what happens when, actually not that case, sorry, I haven't got the advice client. So what happens when someone changes, for example, puts a heat pump into their home, and we know something about their home, we know something about the technology, but through our advice work and through the evidence base that we've got, we also know something about how someone might use that technology. And we know from our advisors that there are certain demographics who move into a home they have always used, for example, a gas boiler, which is very common in the UK, and then they move into a home that has a heat pump, but they operate it in the way that you would operate a gas boiler. So they have a perception that the best way is to only turn on, particularly if you're in sort of constrained financial services, the best way is to just turn on your heater when you really need it, rather than operate it as the heat pump wants to be operated, which is constantly at a low temperature. So we can model that kind of behaviour around how people understand their technology, what tariff they're likely to sign up to, and then we can create half-hourly demand profiles to understand essentially, what does that do for the energy demand, but also what does that do for the cost, because we can add a tariff to that. And then we will do things like, okay, we'll take the example of a household who's just got a heat pump, they're operating it like a gas boiler and it's costing them so much, but if they follow these 4 steps that we know are needed and that we know that people don't, certain groups don't understand, they will change. So first of all, you need to start running your heat pump efficiently. Second of all, you need to get onto the right tariff. Third of all, you need to optimise according to your tariff. And then fourth of all, you might want to opt into a flexibility scheme. And that's how you're going to make it work for you. And then the final example of how we sort of use these insights is we do segment. So this is an example of the flexibility archetypes that we developed for the National Energy System Operator. So that was segmenting the GB population into different types of households, but then adding this flexibility lens to it. So taking those insights that I talked about from Crowdflex and other trials, where we know that the distribution of behaviour, is different within each of those archetypes, and trying to come up with a traffic light system that helps you understand that within one particular archetype, you're likely to see this range of activities. So, this household might have high technical potential, they've got the asset, they can flex, but, in this case, they do have high smart meter adoption rates, so they're highly likely to be able to sign up to a scheme, but they've got low digital skills, so they're unlikely to actually opt in. So it's these kind of variables that can then be used when you're modelling the whole system impacts of choices. You're like, well, I can put in the technology across the UK housing stock and I can sign them up to this tariff and I can see what the outcome is, but I can also adjust for these kind of behavioural insights that show that different people's abilities and capabilities affect their response and affect the way that they use the technology. So that was it. And just to conclude, I just wanted to sort of underscore this point about using EDI as a research objective. So, and really using it to shape the questions you ask and the insights that you generate in order to change sort of how things work on the ground. And the way that we sort of operationalise that is that we work with innovators and utilities to really embed these questions of inclusion and equity into their understanding of their markets and their potential customers. We use different types of empirical evidence. So we do use obviously national trials and national data sets, but individual household engagements also really shape our understanding of inequality and inclusion. And we do base our modelling and analysis in real experience, but and the evidence base, but we're always keeping in mind the potential for change, for making an intervention that helps somebody take a different choice, go down a different path, achieve a different outcome, and we actively build that capacity in individuals and organisations. So thank you.